What's up, everybody? I'm Derek, this is Rocky E Forge, and today I'm getting into another Christmas gift or decoration that you can forge yourself, and that is going to be a stocking hanger. So, let's get rocking. Alright, so we are starting out here with a 2-foot long piece of 1/4 by 1/2 inch flat stock. This would also work out great with a piece of 3/8 inch square stock if that's what you've got lying around. And we are going to come to the far edge of the anvil and forge down about 2 inches of this to a taper. And I want the end of it to be square, so that ends up being just a little over 1/4 by 1/4. And then I taper that up on the wide side of that bar just to taper it in this direction down to that square. And I don't do anything beyond just squaring that up. Then we're gonna get this back in the fire. A little bigger than a 1/4 inch square all the way up, and then forge that taper nice and smooth back about 3 inches. Making sure to even up both sides. This will loop around and become the hook eventually at the end of the project, once we start shaping this. So, next step is I'm gonna cool this end and spin this around so I can hold on to that end and forge the fishtail scroll on this end of the bar. I'm thinking this ended up too long. My note said 2 feet, but I'm thinking I actually wanted 18 inches. And now that I've forged that down, I might be a little out of luck there. But I'm thinking I'm gonna measure this out about 19 inches. I probably got an inch of extra, probably not even an inch, but I'm gonna measure out 19 inches and cut it. So if you're working on this, starting at the beginning, start with 18 inches or cut this down. You can go any size with this. You could do 2 feet and make a bigger one. I want a slightly smaller one, and I'm just looking at it and thinking it's a little bit too long. And we're gonna come in with the crossbeam hammer and forge about 2 inches of this bar into a fishtail scroll, and the width I'm going for is about 1 inch wide. And I'm going to take another heat on this to get that to the width that I want and forge that up to about 2 inches. Now, something worth noting here is I'm forging kind of at an angle, so part of my crosspeen is overlapping the end. And as this fishtail gets skinnier, your risk of jamming the edge of the crosspeen into the face of the anvil gets higher and higher. So I've been forging this at the far edge of the anvil so that I can overhang the edge of the crosspeen over the edge of the anvil and not strike my anvil with that kind of sharper corner of my crosspeen. And that's sitting at right about 1 inch. And as far as making this go 2 inches up the bar, that's not super important here. The width is what I'm looking for. Now, the big thing I'm gonna do next is just planish this, all of the rough surface there, planish that down to roughly flat, just to make it look a little nicer. Even out that surface. And if there's any variation in the edges or the sides, make sure you bring it to one of the edges of the anvil and rest that surface on the edge of the anvil as you're hammering at that angle to bring everything back in line, or to make sure that the spread is the same on either side. All right, so that gives us the setup for the stocking hook. I'm gonna cool this end back off, and then we're gonna switch back to the tapered end again and start working on that ball finial. I'm gonna start this next step just by upsetting the end just a little bit. And I don't really have a measurement I'm going for here, so sorry about the imprecision. And I just want to do that to kind of set up the finial creation here. And then the next thing I'm going to do is come back, throw this back in the fire, and then come back with my butcher off about 3/4 of an inch from the tip here, and that will become the ball. I'll upset that into a square here in just a second. And then we're going to really carefully taper back. Taper back from that point where we butchered in, and I'm going to taper about 3 to 4 inches back from there, pretty roughly the same as what it previously was, just maintaining that taper a little further back up. And I'm just being really careful to make sure that the edge of my hammer face and the edge of the anvil don't hit the corner of what's going to become the finial. All right, so next we're gonna bring this to the post vise, and we're gonna lock this in the jaws of the vise right so that the jaws of the vise support the edges of that finial that we established with the butcher. And then we're going to upset that by calling its mother bad names. No, I'm just kidding. By forging down on that. We're going to take it back to the anvil and straighten that out before we do another round of that. And my goal here is to get that as close to a cube as possible. All right, so now that I've got this roughly cubic, obviously it's not even close, but the next step we're going to do is forge this down to as roughly square as possible, and then start forging this finial into the ball shape that we're looking for. All right, so now what we're going to do here is we're going to start forging in on those corners in order to kind of forge that into more of a sphere. And we're going to start on the edges and the corners kind of all in one. And we're just trying to forge everything in toward the center. And once a new edge shows up, you want to forge on that new edge to the point where you run out of edges, at which point you've achieved forging the ball finial. And this is going to look really jagged and ugly and kind of awkward at first. So don't freak out about that. Just keep going. It will eventually even itself out. And you'll see that because of the fish lipping action or the spreading at the edge further than in the center, you're going to get a little bit of a divot in there. I'm going to go ahead and take this to back to the vise and hammer that back down and kind of hammer around that divot to kind of incorporate it into the ball finial, and that'll continue pressing everything in toward the center and make this finial just a little bit nicer looking. And then once you've kind of established enough edges to the point where there's just 1,000 of them, that's obviously an exaggeration, you can just kind of roll this on the anvil face and angle it at certain angles and angle your hammer blows. And you'll get a decent little ball finial. And then just come in and planish at a black heat to make that nice and smooth. This doesn't have to be perfect, obviously. Mine is a little oblong and a little more cylindrical than I'd like it, but sometimes that's just how it turns out. And I'll probably take this back to the jaws of the vise and hammer this in a little circle again and fiddle with this for a little while. But as for the purposes of this video, we're going to move on. All right, so now I'm just going to come to the face of the anvil and knock these corners in all the way along the edge. And this gets complicated when you've got an oblong piece of material, but you just got to figure out where it sits and forge that in. Making sure not to strike the finial, because you don't want to mess up all of that work. And then I like to forge on every single edge or corner because the amount of force that you're putting in with a hammer is attenuated by the actual piece of material. And as such, the back side or the side that's touching the face of the anvil is not getting as much force back and thus not flattening out as much. So you're going to have two corners that are not as wide as the other ones. And this is another way to just get a better forge in on the end of that ball finial. I just noticed some spots that were just not as even as I wanted. All right, so to forge the hook, first thing I'm going to do is cool off the ball finial so that I can strike on it without worrying about messing it up, and then bring this to the horn and just simply forge that over up to about where that taper ends, and then forge that and shape that the way I think it looks best. And then that is going to set where I put my touch mark, because I want it visible on the front-facing portion of the bar. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll continue to shape this. I stuck this in upside down, so we're going to awkwardly hold this like that. There we go. And then I'm going to cool the whole hook here. Well, I still got some heat in it. And go ahead and just bend this over the edge of the anvil. Just a tad, and I'll show you why that is in a little bit. But now that we've got that shape established, we're going to flip this around and curl the point that will become the foot that rests on a windowsill or a mantle or wherever you hang your stockings, and then we'll be pretty well close to finished. And now we're going to do this by scrolling effectively, starting not on the actual fishtail itself, and we're just going to continue pushing it further and further over the edge of the anvil. We're going to work this in heats, and I'm just seeing that I can curl this up a little bit extra just with the heat I've got in it here. But the point is to kind of curl this in on itself and eventually have this portion of the fishtail rest on the flat face of the mantle or windowsill or wherever you hold your, wherever you put your stocking. And I'm using the horn here now just to control where I want this to bend, and we're just going to keep bending this over and over and over until it gets. And I want this to remain fairly straight. I'm going to bring this in here. And I'm just trying to even this up now, but I'm pretty well down to where I want it. And the foot looks like it's a little extra curled. And the way I'm gonna fix that is I'm gonna lay the foot itself on the horn of the anvil, and I'm gonna just forge off the horn of the anvil on unsupported steel to force that to bend that direction. That looks better. And yeah, I'm glad that I ended up cutting this a little shorter. 2 whole feet of this would have made quite the large hook. And if you've got a really thick mantle, this is kind of the point here where it's going to sit on the mantle and then bend in underneath the actual mantle or the windowsill or what have you, so that the force of the stocking while it's hanging is as close to in line with the force of the mantle keeping the foot up, so that it doesn't have a tendency to rotate. If this was further out, you'd get what's called a moment or a bending force, which would cause the hook to rotate about that point and it would fall off the windowsill. That's why I placed this little bend right here in, so that the forces are as in line as possible. Now I went ahead and tossed this back in the fire just briefly, and I'm gonna let this cool down a little bit before I start brushing in certain spots, because I don't want it to deform, but I do want it hot enough that the scale is kind of loose, and I'm just gonna brush all over this thing. And I'm not gonna make you watch all of it. What you would generally want to do is cool this off and then go to the place where you're gonna hang this, and then kind of figure out where it sits on the windowsill or the mantle or what have you, and then adjust cold or hot, however you want, before you apply any kind of finish to this. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just gonna finish this up with a nice coat of beeswax, which will darken the steel and give it a nice rust-proof coating. Whew. And it just kind of looks a little nicer than just the bare metal. Now you wanna do this hot, but not generally so hot that the smoke catches fire. But you wanna do it hot so that the wax actually melts, and B, you wanna do it hot enough to smoke so that it actually kind of burns and polymerizes to form a layer on the steel that kind of clings to it and stays there without it feeling waxy and sticky. And then I'm just gonna take a shop towel and wipe off the excess to keep it from being sticky and waxy. Please do not burn yourself. All right, so as you can see, the foot rests on the windowsill, and then the hook itself curves back to contact the wall or the rest of the sill or what have you, and this makes a very stable hook. Now the foot ended up a little cockeyed, and I'm gonna go fix that after this video. But in the grand scheme of things, I think it turned out very nice, and let's see if it holds my stocking. And that is going to do it for today's video. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like, leave a comment, hit subscribe, ring that notification bell. If you want to support me and the channel further, please consider becoming an honorary striker on my Patreon. That link is in the description below the video. Or please consider becoming a member on my YouTube channel. And as always, keep on rocking.